Hello everyone, and welcome to the Improving Safety Culture Barriers, Challenges, and Solutions webinar. This webinar is the first in a two-part webinar series that we're doing on improving safety culture. It's also part of our Return to Work, Stay at Work webinar series, and we're glad to have you here today. Well, my name is Tanya Hyde, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. I'm the project manager with the Canadian Institute for the Relief of Pain and Disability. This webinar is made possible through the support of the Community Grants Program through the BC Government, as well as through donations and memberships. As I mentioned, my name is Tanya, and I'm moderating the session today and handling the Q&A session. And our speaker today is Heinrich Bukes. Heinrich is an award-winning safety management, occupational hygiene, and environmental management specialist. Following his education in public health and environmental health in South Africa, he worked as a risk professional for one of the largest transportation companies in the world. In Canada, he went on to become safety professional for the Ontario Safety Association for Community and Healthcare, Health Safety and Environmental Manager at Molson, Director of Services and Resources at Miosa, and Director of Safety and Prevention at the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority. And he recently joined EPCOR as the HSE Management Systems Specialist. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Heinrich.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Tonya. I won't say much more about myself since you've done such a good job at that. So we'll just dive right into it. Let's look at today's agenda. We're going to be looking at the concept of safety culture, or the definition of safety culture, and the various opinions or views on it out there, and also what obstacles that provide in practice for the employers out there. We'll also be looking at my own experience in observing safety culture, and I hope that brings a practical side to the presentation that's highly sought after. We will be looking at characteristics of organizations with a healthy safety culture, and the reason for doing that is because it's such a difficult concept to grasp. So if you look at the outcomes of a good safety culture, it's easier to understand the concept, and if you focus on those outcomes and reverse engineer your management system to meet those outcomes, it becomes easier to have a healthy safety culture. We look at safety culture's impact on safety performance from a bit broader perspective than just my own. It's always good to have your own personal experience, but it's even better to look at what's happening around you and around the world and see if that matches up. And then we'll look at some barriers and challenges associated with safety culture, and then potential solutions. So what is safety culture? It seems every study you read provides you with a different definition. All of them has got certain similarities, for instance, shared beliefs, shared best practices or healthy practices, good attitudes, and so on, but it doesn't really come at the problem from the same perspective. It looks at the safety culture concept from a different angle, or from different angles. So it's hard to have a good understanding for the end user of what's really meant by a safety culture. So here's one definition by the Health and Safety Executive out of the UK. I'll read it slowly because it's quite complex. The product of individual and group values, attitudes, perceptions, competencies, and patterns of behavior that determine the commitment to, the style and proficiency of the organization's health and safety management. So as you can see, the way they look at it is to what extent do the health and safety management system or management efforts is focused on activities. So their approach is more around the management system itself. Then by Valerie Barnes, another definition, the values, attitudes, motivations, and knowledge that affects the extent to which safety is emphasized over competing goals in decisions and behavior. So as you can see, it talks about the same kind of concepts and things, but it comes at it from a slightly different angle. And she's from the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. For our discussion then, to make sure everybody's on the same page, I've simplified the definition as much as possible so that we can have a clear understanding of what we're talking about when you talk about safety culture. So a healthy safety culture consists of shared beliefs, sound philosophy, healthy attitudes, and practices. Now, in looking at the research around it, oftentimes that practices bit is left out, and I think that's a big mistake. We should always look at the end result, at what's being practiced or the actions that's happening on the shop floor. So that's why I specifically included that component of the concept. So, a safety culture observed. If you look at the slide there, that's where I studied at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. I studied occupational safety, and I did really well. I was top of my class in all 4 years, and that sort of painted a picture in my mind that I can, by being disciplined, I can really make an impact on the workforce. I thought I knew my stuff. I thought I knew what safety is all about, and if you have a solid audit program and you have a solid system and you have solid regulations and rules, you're set to go. All you have to do is you have to enforce those rules and regulations, and compliance will be good, and you will have a good safety performance. And boy, was I wrong. That's only the beginning. That's only one small part of the equation. You really need to look at it from a much wider perspective, a much wider angle to be successful as a safety professional. So that's me. In 1989, I started my career as a risk professional when I exited university. I worked for Transnet, as Tanya had mentioned, a very large transportation company in South Africa. And I started my career there, and that's where I started to observe safety culture. And I'm going to do it at the end of an example of two depots that was under my authority when it comes to health and safety. I had two electrification depots. Electrification is these over-there lines, and I oversaw the maintenance, the safety of the maintenance personnel working on those power lines. Like I said, I had two depots under my authority, and this is what their performance looked like. So as you can see, both of them was responsible for maintenance on these high voltage power lines, both the north and the south. The north depot had 95 employees, and the south depot had 97 employees. And both of them had the same performance in their health and safety management system. They had a 3-star NOSA rating, which is a very common management system that's used all over the world, but specifically in South Africa. They had a risk index of 4.2. But now the interesting part shows up. The North Depot only had a lost time injury rate of 3.5. And that means 3.5 injuries out of 100 workers per year. And the South one had a much, much higher injury rate of 15.2. So as you can see, it's a very significant difference. It's almost 4 times as much. So this really puzzled me, and it sort of put a damper on my enthusiasm just coming out of university, because as you can see, they've scored the same at the risk index. They've got the same performance for the management system, but yet there was a very big difference in how they performed when it came to the actual numbers. So this led to a big question to myself. Why was there such a big difference? Why was there such a big difference in performance? But luckily, I worked for the organization for about 12 years, so I had the opportunity to observe them and see what the difference was. So firstly, let's look at what the department is. Their reaction to incidents or accidents was quite different from the South side. They got personally involved with the investigations. Managers had to tell the department head what went wrong. It wasn't left up to the safety. It wasn't left up to me to decide what happened. The managers, the department heads held the managers personally responsible, or they had the responsibility to explain what happened. So they held people accountable. And I remember one time there was an incident, and there was a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but there was quite significant safety violations. And he got so angry with the report that he was slamming his fist on the table, and he said, "Don't tell me this can't be done." And that passion, that commitment, that true involvement with these matters, I think really made a difference in the performance. Then look at the supervisors. They were more knowledgeable about health and safety regulatory matters when it comes to the workplace. Whenever I had a discussion with one of the managers, they always seemed a little bit more sharp, a little bit more knowledgeable about what the regulation says. They also had a lot more discussions about health and safety, not only at the Joint Health and Safety Committee meetings, but also during regular work. I've noticed that the people on the supervisors on the south side never really spoke about health and safety matters. They mostly spoke about getting the work done. These supervisors also gave workers the autonomy, and they trusted their judgment to deal with hazards. I think that's quite important, that empowerment. It buys trust and buy-in, and so the workers had autonomy to deal with the hazards. They showed compassion when accidents happened. I remember one incident, the individual was hospitalized, and the supervisor actually went out to the hospital 3 days in a row to do a visit. So that sort of gets you that personal touch, that personal buy-in. And they also had an open door when it comes to health and safety matters. Any health and safety concern that was brought forward by the workforce was listened to carefully and significantly. And that significantly made an impact, because people felt that they can be open and honest about what's happening out on the floor. The workers, they were more involved in the risk assessment process. So in the south side, people was more, hazards was more identified by managers and supervisors, but the workers was much more involved on the north side. They were keen to participate in Joint Health and Safety Committee meetings. You could always see whenever there's a meeting that the numbers are full. On the south side, we struggled to get the numbers. People just simply didn't show up for the meetings. So it was much easier to work with because the people was involved, they were there. There was a higher usage of the OHS suggestion box. So a lot more ideas came from the floor when it comes to health and safety. And they also spoke more about safety issues during their lunch breaks and around the water cooler and so on. It wasn't something that was kept hush-hush. It was a very open discussion, and they actually took quite a big pride in coming up with safety solutions for difficult problems. Risk awareness. Almost everybody understood and knew their risk rating. If you'd ask someone what's your risk rating at the moment, or what does the risk rating mean, or what's the hazards in your work environment, they could tell you. And they also had a 90% compliance in hazard awareness training. The south end just had a little bit over 60%. So the company standard was set at 80%, but they achieved 90% consistently over that time period. So the fact that they were so aware about hazards, I think, also made a huge impact on the safety performance. And they knew the consequences of exposure. Oftentimes that's a forgotten thing. People is quick to identify hazard, but they don't know what the impact on their health might be if they're exposed to a certain chemical, for instance. Compliance, there was more regular observations and record keeping of those observations. It was common practice for jobs to be observed by the manager. It was common practice to teach people on the spot if there was non-compliance, and there was peer accountability. In other words, if a worker had noticed that his co-workers didn't work safely. He brought that to their attention and they had a discussion about it. So people was really looking out for one another, which I think further sort of fueled the good feeling about safety in the northern depot. Trust and workplace morale. Managers were willing to roll up their sleeves. They did not only sit at their desk. They really was part of the work activities. They were on site often. They participated in safety discussions and meetings. Supervisors were seen as coaches and friends rather than just bosses or people of authority. And the two-way respect was very apparent. There was no us and them kind of feel. It was always how do we get the job done, how do we get the job done safely. And I think that's a very important distinguishment, it's very different from the South End where there was always this, you will do this my way or you won't work here anymore. So the answer to that big question is the northern depot had a much healthier safety culture than the south depot as a result of all these activities. So it's difficult to sort of establish what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So because the activities lead to a safety culture and a good safety culture lead to the safe activities. So there's a bit of reciprocity going on there. So let's look at the characteristics of an organization with a healthy safety culture then and see how that matches up with my own experiences. According to Cooper, I've done a study on this. He had said that organizations with a healthy safety culture, there's a strong management commitment, they've got a good leadership, and they are involved. As you can see, that perfectly matches up with my own experience. There's strong communication channels. As I mentioned to you, the supervisors had an open door. There was a lot of chit-chat around safety, around the water fountain and in the hallways. Promotion of near misses. Near miss reporting from the fact that there were so many suggestions around near misses and so on. You can see that also lines up with my own experience. Hazard awareness and good housekeeping. We spoke about hazard awareness, that people was more aware of hazards. A mature, stable workforce. Yeah, I didn't really notice that. In the economy in South Africa, people basically stayed in the same job as long as they could. Good personnel selection, job placement, and promotional procedures. So you can see that the people that you choose to become your company is your company. So if you choose them well, then you've got a good company. A well-trained and educated workforce. So as you can think back to my discussion just now, you'll remember that I said that the supervisors was more knowledgeable about regulations and rules, so that's evident for me as well. And then he also mentioned that you have to have a good orientation program. You only have one chance to make an impression on somebody as to sort of explain how things are done here when it comes to health and safety, and that's during the orientation period. If there's any weakness in your orientation program, you will be hard-pressed to build a good safety program, to build a healthy safety culture. So let's look at safety culture's impact on safety performance then from a bit wider perspective. As you can see there, the first time safety culture, the concept of safety culture was actually coined was after the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. And then also on Continental Express Flight 2574, it was noted that corporate culture played a significant role in these accidents. The next one there, reduced job site incidents after cultural intervention program in the Netherlands concrete industry was shown by the study by Owen Sol in 2008. Next one there, safety culture was associated with safety performance at corporate level. This association was positive, showing that more favorable safety culture was associated with improved safety performance. Another study there by Rietman and Pekikinen, corporate safety culture has gradually become a primary safety performance indicator. Very important finding there. And then in a recent study, 15 major petrochemical accidents during the periods of 1980 to 2010 noted that poor safety culture contributed to 12 of that 15 accidents. So as you can see, research also shows that the safety culture plays a very significant role, obviously not the only role, but a very significant role in safety performance. So this led to some more questions. As time goes by, you always find more questions in your career. So if safety culture has such a significant impact on health and safety performance, why do we not see more efforts to improve it? And why is it not more visible in organizational health and safety management systems or management efforts? If it's such common knowledge that it plays a big role, why don't we see it? I think I got some potential answers, so let's take a look at those. So firstly, I think the fact that there's no unified definition of what safety culture is, and there's no concrete concept of it, there's various ones and there's various angles to look at it, it becomes very difficult to understand what, or to have an end goal in mind. And I think also employers is quite ignorant about it, and also about safety in general, but I'll get to that in the next few slides. And then I think the biggest challenge is the myriad of influencing factors. There's so many aspects that influence the safety culture that employers don't really know where to start when they want to address safety culture. And then there's no real external drivers. Measurement of safety culture is really complex and difficult. And then lastly, we'll also look at what is the belief, or we have to ask the question at least, what is the belief? Do people think that safety culture can really change, or that they are able to change safety culture? So the first one there, the definition and concept. As I've mentioned earlier, there's many definitions for safety culture, and it's also quite a difficult concept. I think everybody that you speak to will have some sort of a different idea of what safety culture is when you ask that question. But the important thing is, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. And I think that's the sort of essence what I want to say with this idea that because there's so many definitions and so many variable ways of looking at safety culture, people can't really have an end goal in mind. So they don't say, this is what I want to achieve, or this is what my company should look like, because there's so many different definitions and views of safety culture. So employers' ignorance. People don't know what they don't know. That's the big problem. Oftentimes when you talk about accidents with employers or managers, they think that you can't really do anything about it. It's just a cost of business. It's just the way things are. I mean, it's an accident. How can you prevent an accident? Because you can't plan for it. It's just something that happens unplanned. So they just kind of accept it, and they don't know what tools is really available out there to improve performance. Even if you use the word safety performance, a lot of their eyes will sort of glaze over, and they have no concept of what safety performance is. To them, it's just something that happens. So safety culture or safety culture improvement is not even in the picture when it comes to safety management. And then there's a myriad of influencing factors, which is another challenge. So most studies that you will read basically breaks it down to three big groups, which is the person, the job, and the organization. Another way of looking at it is also your safety climate, or what is the perception of the workers out there around safety? To what extent do they feel their managers would care if they participate in the safety program or if they work safely? To what extent do they think they've got the resources and so on? And then the organization, that's your management system itself. In other words, to what extent do you manage and track training? To what extent do you, ensure educated leadership and so on and so forth? So those are the components of the safety management system. And then lastly is all the behavioral things where there's a whole litany of research that helps us understand human behavior, but as you can imagine, it's quite difficult to pin down how it actually impacts safety culture. And all these things is reciprocal. In other words, they interact on one another. It makes it even more difficult to manage. But let's look at a few. There's many more on the list. I only mentioned a few of the sort of higher level ones, but the list for each one of these next 3 slides just continues. So personal factors are your personal commitment to safety, the perceived risk, your competencies, your safety knowledge, and job satisfaction. The situation or the organizational factors are things like management commitment, leadership skills, policies and procedures, effective communication, adequate resources, emergency preparedness, and the status of safety personnel within the organization. Does the safety people sit somewhere in the basement and don't play a role? They're just there to fill in the accident investigation forms, or do they actually participate in management decisions? All of these kind of factors play a role in the safety culture. As you can see, it becomes very complicated very quickly. This is the second leg of the picture, and as you can see, there's many factors, complicated factors that influence the safety culture. And then the last leg is the behavior. These are things like the work environment, work patterns, how well risk assessments are being done, and what's the understanding of them, standard operating procedures, involvement in decision making, housekeeping. I think housekeeping is also quite often undervalued when it comes to the safety culture. Just think to yourself, if you walk into a well-organized, clean, neat place, what's your willingness to work safe compared to, or your appetite to work safe compared to if you walk into a place where there's chaos and things are laying around, there don't seem to be any order to anything. It just sets the scene for an accident when housekeeping is poor. So I think housekeeping is quite often underlooked when it comes to impacting safety culture. Then the measurement, I think another big barrier is measurement is very difficult. It requires very specific skills. You need educated people that understand human behavior. You need people that understand management principles and philosophies and things like that. So it's difficult to get a good grasp of what safety culture or what the organization's safety culture is really like. Measurement tools have only recently been developed. I just read a study from Fleming in 2006 that there was an absence of safety culture indicators out there. So it's very recent. After that study, he released a few indicators that I think would be it's a very good starting point. I think there's a lot of value in it, and I think using that as a starting point, we can really come up with something that can make a difference. You need to use three different kinds of measurement because there's 3 different kinds of impactors or things that affect it, or factors. So you need to do surveys, you need to do behavior sampling, and you have to do auditing of the safety management system. And then after you've done that, you have to appropriately weigh those factors so that you can get a clear picture of what the safety culture is really like, and that's where it becomes really difficult. Because what weighs the most, what should you place the most emphasis on? It makes it very complicated to find a true picture of what the situation is. These measurements also tend to be very expensive. They're often in the tens or hundred thousands of dollars range, and organizations are simply pushed away when they see these numbers because they simply cannot conceive of spending the next 3 or 6 months in in doing these surveys and spending that amount of money, and then in the end, can they really trust these results, because it's such a complicated thing to try and get a grip on. So oftentimes they just steer away, and they don't even try to improve their safety culture because of this measurement problem. And then there's no real external drivers. As you can clearly see, you understand, the concept of safety culture is not really legislatable. You can't really write a piece of legislation to force employers to have a safety culture. So there's not much that authorities can do, but it's also not in global safety management system standards, and that is something I think we can look at in the future to improve safety culture. I mean, there's so many standards, and almost all of them do not include a specific component for safety culture. Now, I have to say, components of safety culture is captured in all of these systems. All of these systems talk about management commitment, about management education, about involvement and so on, but it doesn't really specify, it doesn't really allow for you to measure your safety performance, because it's interwoven throughout these systems. So my feeling is that we have to pull those elements out so that we can better manage safety culture by identifying the ones that impact safety culture. Further challenges is it's a very big change. I've got a suspicion that employers don't believe that it's changeable or that they have the ability to change it. Is it worth the effort, and how many people really has a long-term commitment to improve safety culture? It might take 5 to 10 years for a larger organization to change their safety culture, and it will take continuous commitment to that efforts. And I think that's also a deterrent for people to even start, because they just don't see their way forward, being committed to improving safety culture over the period of 5 or 10 years. Okay, so let's look at some potential solutions. From occupational health and safety agency, authority, or workers' compensation board's perspective, I think it would be a really good idea to establish a national or the international body for the advancement of workplace safety culture. We could also try and develop, or they could try and develop a national or international standard similar to the national standard of Canada's psychological health and safety in the workplace standard for safety culture. I think that would be a very significant step, especially if we can do it on a global scale. That would help try to align things a little bit and try to clear things up as to what the expectation is around safety culture. We can incorporate safety culture as a specific element in safety management systems. And in the audit standard, for instance, we can incorporate it in OSAS 18000 or in the CORE program. I know some safety associations have already done so. So it can be done. There's also some movement in the US and Australia of smaller groups that have started to incorporate safety culture within the management systems, and I think that's the way forward, because if you focus on something, you're actually able to change it. And then further research needs to be done to develop less expensive and intrusive measurement techniques. I think if we can make it simpler for organizations to measure that, to have good indicators of the safety culture without it being so expensive or so intrusive, a lot more organizations would try and actually improve their safety culture. From the employer's perspective, I think it's the best way at this stage is to do a bit of reverse engineering. If you think back to that slide about the characteristics of an organization with a healthy safety culture, we should try to mimic that. So we should really focus on improved leadership, management, and their commitment. not only management commitment in the sense of providing resources and things like that, but also the sort of higher level leadership skills, things like being compassionate, things like empowerment and things like that becomes really important. So focus on leadership development and leadership training. Increased involvement throughout the organization. So focus on positive health and safety promotional strategies. Don't always have safety as a negative, but promote safety in a positive way. Improve communication around health and safety. I know improving communication is oftentimes used as a bit of a cliche, but it's so important, it's so fundamental to health and safety. The better your communication, the better your system is going to be. I mean, if you have a policy and you don't communicate it properly to the workforce, you don't really have anything. So that communication is super critical. You have to engage people to improve, encourage people to improve near-miss reporting. A funny thing happens when there's a lot of near-miss reports. People talk about safety, they are aware of safety, safety becomes a talking point or the topic, and the whole awareness in the organization increases or improves around safety performance when there's a lot of talk about near misses. Currently, where I work at EPCOR, we have a really good near miss reporting system, and I can see a buzz every time a communication comes through around near miss reports. About what could have happened and what we can do to prevent it and so on and so forth. So a very important component there. We have to focus on hazard awareness. As you can recall, in my own personal experience, I've noted that the Northern Depot places a lot more emphasis on that, and it really shows in the end of the day. Further reverse engineering for the employers, ensure good housekeeping, we already spoke about that. Ensure we have a stable workforce, so we have to make sure we have good criteria for personnel selection. Build health and safety questions right into your questionnaire. For instance, if you hire a supervisor or a person to be a supervisor, ask them about their philosophies and their standards and their experience with safety management. Ask them how would they go about to do an accident investigation so that you can get the right people on board when it comes to health and safety. Also have the people with the right attitudes and skills. It helps a lot with building safety culture. You also have to focus on health and safety training, so make sure your training is top-notch, and then make sure you have a very comprehensive health and safety orientation program. That makes all the difference in the world. If you catch people on day one and they realize this is the way things are done, they seldom deviate from that because the tone has been set. Further things that you can do is expand your health and safety management system to include a specific element on safety culture. Make sure that it's not interwoven, it's not lost in between the other elements, so that you can focus specifically on activities around safety culture. So you have to have a measurement mechanism to see where you are when it comes to safety culture. You have to have criteria, targets, and goals. You have to be able to, from those things, develop specific action plans based on your weaknesses or your opportunities for improvement. And it must also be part of the audit or management review, a continuous improvement regime, so that it can improve with your safety management system and not left behind. And then you have to take deliberate action by developing a long-term strategy, and that would be our discussion for the next session. Just like to point out some of the good references and reading materials. If you can find some of the works of Dominic Cooper, really impressed me with his insight and efforts into research. Also, Mr. Fleming there, quite a leader in the field, and he's right here from Canada. He's from Halifax. And then also Valerie Barnes, one of the leaders in the area. So look for her name, you won't be disappointed. And then some good web references. The National Energy Board has an excellent website. It really has cutting-edge information on safety culture. OSHA is always a good source. The International Nuclear Safety Advisory Group is good. That's where Valerie Barnes is from. And then last year, even though it was the first international symposium was last year, on the website there's a list of presentations that was given at that symposium. Quite valuable to take a look at that. And that's it for me.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Heinrich. Actually, Heinrich, could you put up, just keep it on one of those last slides with the references, just so that people can look at those while we're chatting with the question and answers? That would be great.
Sure. Do you want the web references or the...
Yeah, I think the web references would be good. Great, thanks. At this point, we don't have any questions just yet, but if those of you online want to go ahead and use the question box to submit a question that you might have for Heinrich related to the presentation or safety culture in general, or issues you have in your own workplaces, that would be great. I was a little bit curious, Heinrich, you talk a lot about some of the ways that people can improve safety culture. What if you have a particular either manager or even someone in the higher levels of the organization that is not on board, is not interested in improving safety culture, has resistance to it? What are some of your suggested ideas for working with that person, or for that situation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's obviously difficult, especially if it's someone that's got a long history with the organization and very set in his or her ways. It becomes very difficult to change such an individual. But in the end, all you can do is educate, make them understand the concept, involve them in decision making, making it practical for them, making sure that they are understood, that they are also listened to, because oftentimes they bring the voice of reason. Our safety professionals have one goal, and that's safety, but the managers have the business that they need to run. So they bring the opposite side of the discussion to the table, so it's quite important to listen to them clearly and take their opinion to heart and make a joint decision on the best way forward. And oftentimes the more discussion takes place, the more people come around to understand the need for the improvement of safety culture or safety performance.
Great. And then there was a request from someone online to go back
so patience and persist, a short answer.
That's good. There was a request, if you could go back one slide to to that one, I believe. Perfect. At this point, we still don't have any further questions. Oh, wait, there, I got one. Okay. Can you provide any specific examples of criteria or targets that can be used in the health and safety management system to measure safety culture?
Yes. Things that's very specific to safety culture is involvement levels, for instance. So if you can track what your involvement level is, to what extent do people make suggestions, to what extent do people participate in discussions, you can establish an index of those activities and get a sense of to what extent are people involved, and you can track that over time. So you can say, okay, we've got an index factor of, let's use a percentage. It's not really a percentage, but just for argument's sake, let's say 75%, and we're going to try and bring that index up to 90% the following year. That would give you a specific target or goal to improve that involvement levels. Other things is participation level in training, for instance. If you struggle to get people to health and safety training, that's a sure indicator to to identify problems with your safety culture. So you can also track that as a potential target by how's your attendance levels around safety, training improving.
Very good. We have someone who's wondering about safety culture in office settings as well, since a lot of resources are focused on more physically demanding positions, but with the current trend, there are increasingly more chronic conditions developed in office settings. Are there resources more office-related safety and management and prevention versus just the more physically involved professions?
That's a sort of difficult question to answer. I'm sure there would be some studies that was done on office environments around safety culture. I didn't specifically look at any of them in the preparation for this this talk, but the concepts is not really the type of hazards that people are exposed to. Is how do they feel about the environment? How do they what's the management systems in place? It's not really about the type of activities. So I think a lot of the concepts or ideas is directly transferable or relatable to an office environment. I don't think we need to get hung up on the type of hazards that people are exposed to. I did not, however, see a study that was done in an organization around an office setting or administrative tasks. A lot of it is around petrochemical industry, around construction specifically, around manufacturing, specifically around Europe. There's a lot of studies around that. I didn't specifically see something on office settings, no.
All right. And then someone else asking, I work in a community health setting, and the norm is that people receiving care in their homes only require one person for transfers and lifts. How can we work towards changing policy, culture, and getting our managers to make this an important issue? Seems injured home support workers are an exception. Is the expectation or the culture of care at home support?
Well, that's a very big, very loaded question, a very difficult one to answer. I think it depends on where you are within an organization. If you, at a worker level, it would be really difficult to influence that kind of policy or that kind of activity. If you're at a manager level, I think you have a bit better chance, because that's when you talk about policy changes and policy setting, that sort of happens at director and manager level, VP level. So you need to get the message to those people and make them understand what's happening, and that can be a tough sell. I think the best answer is to try and drive it through your health and safety department, because they might have the ear of the VP or the director a little bit better than the workforce, and hopefully through them policy change can be driven. It's been done before. It's just very difficult in a healthcare setting.
All right, and then another question, what impact do you think Canada's Bill C-49 to hold corporate executives, managers, and supervisors personally responsible for ensuring a trained workforce could have on encouraging a workplace safety culture, and how could that be used to ensure better safety culture acceptance?
Once again, it will depend on case studies. It will depend on what's actually happening. As we've seen in the past with some other health and safety legislation that didn't really pan out the way it could have or should have, the legislation loses a bit of its teeth when it comes to a motivator to change. But I think if it's used properly, if people are being raked over the fingers, if things go wrong, I think it can have a very positive impact on safety culture. As I had mentioned earlier, there's no real, the concept of safety culture is not really legislatable, but that doesn't mean that no component of it is not legislatable. So the compliance component of it and meeting legal requirements for safety management systems and regulation is still there. So all those things play a key role in improving safety culture as well.
All right, and then the last one is a little more specific, but they could have a broader impact. Our organization, a community hospital, will be closing in 2 years, and we have to continue to provide a safe service, and keeping a stable workforce is a challenge. Do you have suggestions on motivating those remaining to work safely, even though they may not be continuing on to the new facility? So almost even could be a motivating employees and workers who may not have very stable job positions to work safely?
Yeah, I think the message need to be clear that safety is important on different levels and to different people, and even if you think that safety, or if you don't fully appreciate the importance of safety performance to your organization, you should realize that safety is firstly and fundamentally about yourself. If you don't see the significance of working safely when it comes to your family, for instance, if you're taken away from your family, what happens to your family? If you can't work as a result of a workplace injury, or you have to go on long-term disability or whatever the case may be, what's the impact going to be for your family? So I think that message that safety is it's not only important for the organization, but it's also important for the individual, could be used in that particular situation.
All right, and then if an area is struggling with OHS performance, do you focus on safety culture simultaneously with basic OHS compliance?
Once again, it's kind of a specific question. It's hard to answer that, not knowing all the details surrounding it. But the fact that there are so many management system components that influences safety performance and safety culture makes it a bit easier to do. For instance, if you look at compliance levels, at job task observations, it helps with performance, but it also helps with culture. So it also helps with the safety culture. So by addressing one component, it does address both performance and culture.
All right. I think that's all of the questions that we have. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Thank you very much, Heinrich, for your presentation. I think it was very informative, and I'm looking forward to next week's presentation. And for those of you who are online, the part 2 of this webinar series on improving safety culture will be next week at on Thursday, next Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and it is a phase change implementation strategy. It's going to be the focus. So should focus more on the long term, like Heinrich mentioned earlier in his presentation. So that will be really exciting, and we hope you all will join us for that. And again, thank you very much, Heinrich, for your presentation. That was really great.
Thank you, Tonya. It was a privilege.
And we hope you'll join us all. You all will join us next week, and we will. You'll get an email just like you have for this one, 1 day and then 1 hour in advance for how to join us. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.